He is the absolute, undisputed last movie star on the planet. The fearless, immortal daredevil who jumped out of airplanes, hung from the sides of skyscrapers, and single-handedly saved the theatrical box office when the world needed a hero. For 40 years, his blinding million-dollar smile has been the ultimate symbol of American confidence and invincibility. But behind the record-breaking billions and the death-defying stunts lies a reality that completely, violently shatters the illusion of the perfect leading man. At 63 years old, Tom Cruise is a man running desperately from a crushing, suffocating silence. Behind a Hollywood legend stands a superstar who conquered the globe, but sacrificed his own family to a highly secretive, all-consuming devotion to Scientology. A father who performs miraculous rescues on the silver screen, yet hasn't been photographed with his only biological daughter in over a decade. A man who survived 3 heavily scrutinized, shattered marriages, only to find himself entirely alone at the summit of his empire. Tom Cruise's life is a devastating masterclass in the terrifying cost of absolute control. Why does a billionaire in his 60s continually risk his life, throwing his body off cliffs and out of helicopters? Is it pure dedication to cinema? Or is it an agonizing, adrenaline-fueled escape from the ruins of his private world? And what is the heartbreaking price of becoming a cinematic god when the cost of admission is total isolation? Before we answer these questions, we must go back to the beginning. To understand the lonely king at 63, you must first know the terrified, dyslexic boy who was desperately trying to outrun his father's shadow. The merchant of chaos, the dyslexic prison in the armor of a smile. There's a magnificent, highly engineered illusion at the very center of Tom Cruise's existence. When the public looks at him, they see a machine. They see a man composed of pure, unadulterated discipline, moving through the world with relentless, almost terrifying focus. We assume that a man who exhibits that level of immaculate control must have been raised in an environment of absolute perfection. But true, obsessive control is rarely born from peace. Control is almost always the desperate, lifelong reaction of a child who is raised in absolute chaos. Thomas Cruise Maypother was born on July 3, 1962, in Syracuse, New York. On the surface, his early life was supposed to be a picture of Catholic, middle-class American stability. His mother, Mary Lee, was a special education teacher, a woman possessing a warm, resilient spirit. But the absolute dictator of the household, the man who cast a dark, suffocating shadow over every single room he entered, was his father, Thomas Cruise Maypother III. His father was an electrical engineer by trade, but his true profession was instability. He was a violent, unpredictable, and deeply abusive man. For young Tommy, growing up did not mean playing in the neighborhood or building lifelong friendships. It meant living in a perpetual state of high alert, psychological warfare. The family was incredibly poor, constantly uprooted by the father's erratic career choices and failures. They lived a nomadic, exhausted existence, moving from New York to Canada, dragging their meager belongings from one strange town to another. By the time Tom reached his early teens, he had attended 15 different schools in just 12 years. Imagine the sheer, agonizing exhaustion of that specific reality. A child thrives on routine, on knowing the layout of his bedroom, on recognizing the faces in his classroom. But for Tom, life was a permanent state of packing and unpacking. Every few months, he had to walk into a new, terrifying cafeteria, wearing secondhand clothes, completely alone. He was the eternal outsider. But the poverty and the constant moving were incredibly minor compared to the violence waiting for him at home. Decades later, long after he had become the most powerful actor in Hollywood, Tom stripped away the glamorous, invincible veneer of Maverick to deliver a quote of such startling, brutal honesty about his father that it chills the blood of anyone who hears it. He was a bully and a coward, Tom confessed in a rare, remarkably vulnerable interview, describing the man who gave him his name. He was the kind of person where, if something goes wrong, they kick you. It was a great lesson in my life, how he'd lull you and make you feel safe, and then, bang, For me, it was like, there's something wrong with this guy. Don't trust him. Be careful around him. He was a bully and a coward. Listen to profound, lingering trauma in those words. For the older audiences watching this, especially the men and women who grew up in the 1960s and 1970s, in households where domestic violence was a dark, unspoken secret kept hidden behind closed curtains, that sentence touches a deeply recognized, bleeding nerve. Tom learned the most terrifying lesson a child can ever learn. The person who is supposed to protect you is actually the predator. He learned that safety is an illusion and that at any moment, the ground can violently drop out from under your feet. To survive this terrifying, unpredictable monster, Tom developed a highly sophisticated psychological defense mechanism. If you cannot physically fight the monster, you must learn how to disarm it. You must learn how to manipulate the emotional temperature of the room. Tom discovered that if he was charming, if he was intensely polite, and if he flashed a bright, blinding smile, he could temporarily diffuse the tension. He became a master observer of human behavior out of absolute necessity. That famous $1 million megawatt Tom Cruise smile, the smile that would eventually conquer the global box office and charm billions of people, was not born out of joy. It was forged in the fires of domestic abuse. It was a golden mask designed by a terrified little boy to protect himself from being hit. But the nightmare of his father was compounded by a second, deeply humiliating prison. Tom suffered from severe dyslexia. In the brutal, unforgiving educational system of the 1970s, a learning disability was not met with specialized tutoring or compassion. It was met with impatience and cruel judgment. When Tom was called upon to read in front of his new classmates, the letters scrambled and mutated on the page. He stuttered. He froze. The other children laughed. He was placed in remedial classes, deeply ashamed, carrying the agonizing, secret belief that he was intellectually defective. "I felt like I was an absolute idiot," Tom later admitted, describing the sheer, suffocating embarrassment of his academic struggles. "I'd try to concentrate, but I'd feel anxiety, frustration, boredom. I'd just get so angry." He was entirely trapped. He had a violent father at home and a humiliating, incomprehensible chalkboard waiting for him at school. In 1974, when Tom was 12 years old, the nightmare home finally reached a breaking point. His mother, Mary Lee, displaying an act of immense, life-saving courage, packed up her children in the middle of the night, left her abusive husband, and fled back to the United States. The dictator was gone, but the psychological scars he carved into his son were absolutely permanent. Tom became the man of the house at 12 years old. He took on odd jobs, mowing lawns, delivering newspapers, selling greeting cards, driven by a manic, desperate need to protect his mother and his sisters from ever experiencing poverty again. He briefly sought refuge in sports, becoming a fierce, aggressive high school wrestler, channeling his deep, repressed rage into physical combat. But a severe knee injury abruptly and violently ended his athletic ambitions. He was sidelined, frustrated, and searching for an outlet for the massive, explosive kinetic energy building inside his chest. And then he discovered the theater. When Tom stepped onto the stage in a high school production of Guys and Dolls, an absolute, reality-altering miracle occurred. For the boy who had spent his entire life living in the terrifying, unpredictable chaos of a broken home, the theater was a revelation. In a play, there are no surprises. The script tells you exactly what is going to happen. The director tells you exactly where to stand. It is an environment of absolute, flawless control. And for a severely dyslexic boy who felt stupid in the classroom, memorizing lines through sheer, punishing repetition allowed him to become articulate, powerful, and invincible. On stage, he wasn't a poor kid with the abusive dad. He was a hero. At the age of 18, possessing zero professional experience, no money, and no connections, Tom packed his bags and moved to New York City, and shortly after, to Los Angeles. He was driving into the most ruthless, cynical industry on the planet. But Hollywood had absolutely no idea what was coming. They thought they were getting just another handsome, smiling kid looking for a paycheck. They did not know that they were getting a traumatized, relentless survivor who had been preparing for war his entire life. The boy who was terrified of chaos was about to build the most disciplined, strictly controlled, and massive cinematic empire in human history. But the deep, bleeding wound left by his father was still wide open. As the 1980s dawned, a highly controversial, incredibly powerful religious organization was quietly waiting wings, ready to offer the rising star the exact thing he craved more than oxygen: absolute certainty. The need for speed, the sudden god, and the golden cage. There's a highly intoxicating, deeply dangerous velocity to achieving fame in your early 20s. For a young man who has spent his entire life running away from poverty, running away from an abusive, unpredictable father, and running away from the humiliating, silent prison of dyslexia, the sudden acquisition of power is not just exciting, it is absolutely terrifying. When Tom Cruise arrived in Hollywood in the early 1980s, the industry was captivated by his intense, unblinking focus. He didn't just want to be an actor, he wanted to completely dominate the craft. In 1983, at just 21 years old, he delivered his breakout performance in the iconic coming-of-age comedy Risky Business. When he slid across the hardwood floor in his socks and underwear, lip-syncing to Bob Seger, he didn't just create a memorable movie scene. He permanently carved his image into the absolute bedrock of 1980s American pop culture. The studios quickly realized they had struck a vein of pure, unadulterated cinematic gold. His smile was weaponized charisma. His energy was utterly undeniable. But it was 1986 that completely obliterated the stratosphere of his existence. Director Tony Scott cast a 24-year-old actor as Pete Maverick Mitchell, a reckless, brilliant, and deeply arrogant Navy fighter pilot in the monumental, era-defining blockbuster Top Gun. When Tom Cruise put on the aviator sunglasses, climbed into the cockpit of the F-14 Tomcat, and rode his Kawasaki motorcycle alongside the runway as fighter jets took off into blistering California sunset, he ceased to be a mere movie star. He became an international mythological deity. Top Gun was the highest-grossing film of 1986. The soundtrack dominated the radio. Recruitment for the United States Navy skyrocketed by an astonishing 500% simply because young men across the country desperately wanted to be Maverick. Tom Cruise was suddenly the most famous, most powerful, and most universally desired young man on the entire planet. But look closely at the sheer, suffocating psychological paradox of that specific year. He had achieved absolute global supremacy. The money was flowing in by the millions. The world was worshiping at his feet. Yet, inside the mind of the 24-year-old superstar, the overwhelming, deafening roar of success felt incredibly unstable. Remember the boy from Syracuse. Remember the child who had attended 15 different schools in 12 years, who learned early on that whenever things felt safe, his father would violently, unpredictably pull the rug out from under him. Tom looked at his massive, newly acquired empire, and he was terrified of losing it. The sheer chaos of Hollywood, the lack of structure, and the dizzying, unpredictable nature of fame triggered the exact same deep, primal anxieties he had felt as a helpless child. He was surrounded by sycophants, yes-men, and executives who only cared about his box office receipts. He was a dyslexic kid who had been told he was stupid his whole life, and now he was being told he was a god. The cognitive dissonance was paralyzing. He was desperate for an anchor. He was starving for someone or something to provide him with absolute, unwavering rules to navigate the madness of his own success. In 1987, at 25 years old, searching for stability in the storm, Tom married the actress Mimi Rogers. Mimi was 6 years a senior, brilliant, articulate, and carried a profound, commanding sense of authority. But more importantly, Mimi Rogers was deeply involved in an incredibly structured, highly organized, and highly secretive belief system. She introduced a vulnerable, searching young superstar to the Church of Scientology. To understand why a billionaire actor at the absolute peak of his global influence would commit his entire soul, his fortune, and his life to a controversial religious organization, you must strip away the tabloid headlines and look purely at the psychology of trauma. Scientology offered Tom Cruise the one thing his father never gave him, and the one thing Hollywood could never guarantee: absolute, unquestionable certainty. It provided a highly structured ladder of progression. It offered meticulous, rigid rules for living, communicating, and surviving. It offered auditing sessions that promised to clear the mind of past traumas and negative emotions. For a man who had spent his childhood paralyzed by a learning disability, the organization offered him specialized study technology that he credits with finally helping him overcome his severe dyslexia. They didn't tell him he was stupid. They told him he was immensely powerful, and they gave him a step-by-step manual on how to control the universe around him. Reflecting decades later on the profound, life-altering impact the organization had on his existence, Tom spoke with the absolute, unshakable conviction of a man who believes he has found the ultimate truth. "I've been a Scientologist for over 30 years, he stated proudly, his voice carrying the intense, unwavering focus of a true believer. "It's something that has helped me incredibly in my life. I've been a Scientologist for over 30 years. It's not something that's a part of my life. It is my life." Listen to the terrifying, absolute totality of that devotion. For the audiences watching this, especially those who have seen friends or family members surrender their entire identities to rigid, all-consuming ideologies or demanding corporations, that level of commitment is incredibly sobering. Tom did not just join an organization. He found a surrogate father. He found an impenetrable golden fortress where the chaos of his childhood could never, ever reach him again. He threw his entire soul into the church with the exact same obsessive, relentless discipline he applied to learning how to fly fighter jets or execute dangerous stunts. He became their most prominent, highly visible, and incredibly powerful global ambassador. The organization enveloped him. It provided him with an incredibly tight, deeply loyal inner circle. It insulated him from criticism. But the fundamental tragedy of building an impenetrable fortress is that the very walls designed to keep your enemies out are the exact same walls that eventually trap the people you love inside. By the late 1980s, Tom Cruise had completely conquered the cinematic universe, and he had secured the spiritual armor he believed would protect him forever. He divorced Mimi Rogers in 1990, but he kept the religion she had given him. He was perfectly, beautifully insulated from the world. He was the undisputed king of Hollywood, functioning as a perfectly calibrated, wildly successful machine. But a machine, no matter how shiny or flawlessly programmed, does not possess a human heart. And as the dazzling decade of the 1990s began to unfold, Tom was about to invite one of the most brilliant, breathtakingly talented, and fiercely independent women on the planet to step inside his golden cage. He was about to meet Nicole Kidman, and the devastating, highly publicized, and deeply agonizing collision between her fierce, uncontrollable human spirit and his rigid, absolute demand for perfection was about to result in a divorce so monumental it would permanently alter the trajectory of both their lives and leave two young, adopted children caught entirely in the crossfire. The Three Queens, the Golden Bubble, and the Invisible Wall. There is a specific, incredibly intoxicating gravity that occurs when two massive, intensely bright stars collide in the same orbit. In the late autumn of 1989, on the high adrenaline set of the racing film Days of Thunder, a 28-year-old Tom Cruise locked eyes with a 22-year-old, relatively unknown Australian actress named Nicole Kidman. The contrast between them was breathtaking. Tom was a tightly wound, meticulously disciplined machine, carrying the immense, suffocating weight of global superstardom. Nicole was a wild, untamed spirit. She possessed a fiery mane of red curls, a towering, elegant height, and a fierce, unapologetic independence. She was not a product of the Hollywood factory. She was entirely her own woman. For a man who had spent his entire life obsessively controlling his environment to protect the traumatized little boy inside, Nicole represented something incredibly dangerous, yet utterly irresistible, spontaneous, uncontrollable life. Tom was captivated. Following a swift divorce from his first wife, Mimi Rogers, Tom and Nicole were married in a highly secretive, heavily guarded ceremony in Colorado on Christmas Eve of 1990. Overnight, they became the undisputed king and queen of the Hollywood empire. They walked the red carpets hand in hand, possessing a magnetic, radiant chemistry that sold billions of dollars in movie tickets and magazine covers. To the billions of ordinary people watching them, they were the absolute, flawless manifestation of a modern fairy tale. But a fairy tale is an incredibly fragile script, and real life categorically refuses to follow directions. Behind the heavy, locked gates of their sprawling mansions, the golden couple was quietly fighting a deeply agonizing, entirely human battle. They desperately wanted to build a family. Tom, still driven by the subconscious, burning need to rewrite the tragedy of his own childhood, wanted to be the perfect, present father he never had. But biology proved to be a cruel, unyielding adversary. Early in their marriage, Nicole suffered a devastating, highly traumatic ectopic pregnancy, resulting in a profound loss. The quiet, echoing silence of that medical tragedy cast a heavy shadow over their immaculate home. Unable to conceive naturally, the couple chose to adopt two beautiful children, a daughter, Isabella, in 1992, and a son, Connor, in 1995. They had successfully built the perfect family portrait, but the foundation of the house was resting on two entirely different, slowly diverging tectonic plates. Tom's absolute, unwavering devotion to his highly structured belief system, a religion that required intense auditing, strict adherence to organizational protocol, and inner circle of deeply loyal followers, was becoming an invisible, impenetrable wall within the marriage. Nicole, raised by an intellectual, free-thinking psychologist father in Australia, possessed an inherently questioning, fiercely independent mind. She was not built to blindly follow an absolute doctrine. You cannot place a wild, soaring bird inside a perfectly structured, heavily monitored golden cage and expect it to sing the exact same song forever. The ideological friction between the global superstar and his brilliant, evolving wife was silently, relentlessly building. And then, the universe handed them a cinematic crucible that would permanently, violently tear the marriage apart. In 1997, the legendary, famously obsessive director Stanley Kubrick cast Tom and Nicole as a married couple in the dark, psychological, psychosexual thriller Eyes Wide Shut. The film was a grueling, exhaustive exploration of jealousy, infidelity, and the dark, hidden secrets that fester beneath the surface of a seemingly perfect marriage. Kubrick did not just ask Tom and Nicole to act. He essentially locked them inside a psychological pressure cooker. The production lasted for an unprecedented, agonizing 400 days in London. Kubrick notoriously separated the couple on set, forcing them to shoot highly intimate, emotionally devastating scenes over and over again, relentlessly breaking down their psychological defenses. He demanded that they blur the lines between their actual marriage and the dying marriage of the characters they were portraying. It was a brilliant artistic experiment, but it was absolute, unadulterated poison for a fragile relationship. When Eyes Wide Shut was finally released in 1999, shortly after Kubrick's sudden death, the public saw a masterpiece, but the actors had left pieces of their actual souls on that set. The intense, microscopic dissection of their union had fundamentally altered them. The gap between Tom's rigid need for control and Nicole's desperate need for emotional freedom had become an unbridgeable, terrifying canyon. For the older audiences watching this, for the men and women who have spent a decade pouring their hearts into a marriage, slowly realizing that the person sleeping next to them has become a complete stranger, the quiet, suffocating agony of those final months is profoundly understood. Yet, to the outside world, the golden bubble was still perfectly intact. On December 24th, 2000, they celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary. They renewed their vows. They smiled for cameras. Everything appeared to be safe. But exactly 6 weeks later, in early February of 2001, the golden bubble did not just pop. It was violently, mercilessly executed, without any public warning, without engaging in lengthy, publicized marital counseling. Tom Cruise abruptly and coldly filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. Nicole Kidman was completely, utterly blindsided. The woman who had shared his bed for a decade, the mother of his 2 adopted children, was handed legal papers completely out of the blue. There was no gentle letdown. There was no gradual separation. There was only the swift, incredibly efficient, and terrifyingly cold amputation of a 10-year marriage. When a machine detects a malfunctioning component that threatens the stability of the entire system, the machine does not negotiate. The machine simply cuts the component out to ensure its own survival. Tom, sensing that he could no longer control the narrative of his marriage, and fearing the ideological divide over the raising of their children, pulled the ripcord with absolute, freezing precision. Reflecting on the sheer, breath-stealing shock of that betrayal, Nicole later delivered a quote of such raw, bleeding vulnerability that it permanently shattered the illusion of their perfect romance. "I thought our life together was perfect," she confessed years later, the pain of the sudden abandonment still echoing in her voice. "It took me a very long time to heal. It was a shock to my system. We were in a bubble, just the 2 of us. We became very dependent on one another. I would have gone to the ends of the earth for him. It was a shock to my system." Listen to the devastating, agonizing helplessness of those words. To compound the absolute tragedy of the divorce, shortly after Tom filed the papers, Nicole suffered a heartbreaking, completely devastating miscarriage. She lost a marriage, and she lost a child, all within a matter of weeks. The golden girl of Hollywood was left standing entirely alone in the wreckage, forced to rebuild her entire identity from absolute zero. The divorce was finalized. The children, raised deeply within the confines of Tom's organizational belief system, remained closely aligned with their father. Tom Cruise had successfully, ruthlessly protected his empire, his career, and his ideology. He had maintained absolute control. But as the heavy, ornate doors of his sprawling Beverly Hills mansion closed behind him, the undisputed king of Hollywood found himself sitting on a throne surrounded entirely by silence. He had proven to the world that he was an invincible, disciplined machine. But a machine cannot love. As he entered his 40s, a profound, terrifying midlife panic began to quietly set in. He realized that the public was beginning to see the cold, robotic perfection behind his smile. He desperately, frantically needed to prove to the universe that he was still a human being capable of wild, spontaneous emotion. He was preparing to orchestrate the most spectacular, highly publicized, and ultimately disastrous public romance in the history of modern pop culture. He was about to jump on a yellow couch on national television, setting the stage for a third marriage that would end in an escape so meticulously planned and terrifyingly executed. It would make his action movies look like child's play. The couch jump, the tactical escape, and the stolen daughter. There is a terrifying, highly documented psychological breaking point that occurs when a human being spends 2 decades operating entirely as a flawless, heavily monitored machine. The human mind is not designed to permanently suppress anxiety, chaos, and the messy realities of the heart. If you seal the pressure cooker shut and turn the heat up to $1 billion, the eventual explosion will not be quiet. It will be spectacular, and it will be broadcast live to the entire planet. By the spring of 2005, Tom Cruise was 43 years old. He had spent the last several years projecting an aura of intense, almost robotic control following his incredibly clinical, sudden divorce from Nicole Kidman. But the public had begun to notice the coldness. The media was whispering that his devotion to his rigid, highly structured belief system had completely stripped him of his humanity. Tom felt the narrative slipping from his iron grasp. He desperately, frantically needed to prove to the world that he was still a spontaneous, passionate, and wildly unpredictable romantic leading man. He was dating a beautiful, 26-year-old actress named Holmes. And on May 23, 2005, Tom walked onto the set of the Oprah Winfrey Show, to declare his love to the world. What followed remains one of the most bizarre, intensely analyzed, and deeply uncomfortable moments in the history of modern television. Tom did not just sit down and answer questions. He erupted into a state of manic, unhinged euphoria. He pumped his fists. He grabbed Oprah's hands and shook her violently. He dropped to his knees. And then, in a moment that would permanently alter his public legacy, he jumped onto the bright yellow couch, bouncing up and down, screaming about his new romance. The studio audience laughed and cheered. The internet eventually turned it into a global joke. But if you watch that footage today, stripped of the celebrity spectacle, you're not watching a man experiencing genuine organic joy. You are watching a psychological system failure. He was acting like an alien who had studied a manual on how to act like a human being in love, but had completely miscalculated the calibration. The laughter was too loud. The movements were too violent. It was the desperate, terrifying overcompensation of a man who was absolutely terrified of appearing numb. The ultimate control freak had fundamentally lost control on national television. Despite the bizarre public spectacle, the romance marched forward with an aggressive, highly orchestrated momentum. On April 18, 2006, Tom and Katie welcomed their biological daughter, Suri Cruise. 7 months later, they were married in a spectacular, multi-million-dollar ceremony in a 15th century castle in Italy. To the outside world, the golden bubble had been perfectly reinflated. Tom had his beautiful young queen, and he finally had the biological child he had yearned for since his heartbreaking trauma in the 1990s. Suri became the most photographed, most famous child on earth, constantly carried in her father's strong arms, wrapped in a cocoon of absolute luxury. But inside the echoing, highly guarded walls of their Beverly Hills fortress, the atmosphere was growing incredibly suffocating. Katie Holmes was a fiercely protective mother. As Suri approached the age of 6, the precise age when children within Tom's specific belief system are historically introduced to its intense, rigorous auditing practices and strict ideological training, a profound maternal terror began to grip Katie's heart. She looked at the intense, isolated structure surrounding her husband. She looked at his older, adopted children, who had been completely absorbed into the organization. And she made a quiet, terrifying, absolutely resolute decision. She was not going to let her daughter disappear behind that invisible wall. In June of 2012, while Tom was thousands of miles away in Iceland filming the action movie Oblivion, Katie executed an exit strategy that completely stunned the Hollywood establishment. She did not ask for a divorce face-to-face. She did not engage in couples counseling. Knowing the immense power, wealth, and legal resources of the organization standing behind her husband, Katie orchestrated a meticulous, covert, tactical escape. She allegedly used disposable burner phones to communicate with her lawyers. She secretly rented a secure apartment in New York City. And then, with the absolute, terrifying precision of a military extraction, she filed for divorce and sole custody of Suri, completely blindsiding the most powerful actor on the planet. Imagine the sheer, breathtaking, and deeply poetic karma of that exact moment. 11 years prior, Tom had handed Nicole Kidman divorce papers completely out of the blue, executing a cold, clinical amputation of their marriage. Now, the universe had circled back to deliver the exact same devastating blow. The man who obsessed over controlling every single variable of his existence was sitting in a trailer in Iceland, realizing that his wife and his beloved daughter had successfully, permanently vanished from his kingdom. The divorce was settled with astonishing, unprecedented speed in just 11 days. Katie walked away with primary custody of Suri. She had won the ultimate battle. She had successfully pulled her daughter out of the golden cage. But the victory for the mother resulted in the most agonizing, tragic, and permanent consequence for the father. Following the finalization of the divorce, a terrifying, heavy silence descended upon Tom Cruise's relationship with his daughter. Because Katie had chosen to leave the belief system, the rigid, uncompromising rules of that specific organization reportedly dictated a very strict, severe policy regarding interaction with former members who are deemed suppressive or antagonistic to group. The invisible wall had been erected, and it was impenetrable. In 2013, Tom filed a defamation lawsuit against a magazine that claimed he had abandoned his daughter. During the grueling, highly publicized deposition, lawyers aggressively pressed him on whether Katie had left Protect Suri from his religion. Forced under oath, stripped of his PR team, the broken superstar offered a quote of such startling, tragic vulnerability that it completely destroys the illusion of his invincibility. Did she say that? That was one of the assertions, yes. Tom quietly admitted during the deposition, his voice carrying the heavy, agonizing weight of a defeated patriarch. There is no need to protect my daughter from my religion, but yes, that was one of the reasons. Listen to the breathtaking, devastating tragedy of that admission. For the older audiences watching this, especially the grandparents who live for the weekend visits of their children, or the fathers who have endured the agonizing, chest-crushing pain of family estrangement, this is the ultimate, unsurvivable nightmare. What followed was a decade of absolute, unbroken silence. Tom Cruise, a man possessing an estimated net worth of $600 million, a man who owns private jets and can fly to any destination on the globe at a moment's notice, has not been publicly photographed with his biological daughter, Suri, since approximately 2012. He missed her birthdays. He missed her prom. He missed the beautiful, messy, ordinary progression of her childhood. He remained fiercely loyal to the absolute, unyielding doctrine of his belief system. But the price of admission to that immaculate, golden sanctuary was a permanent sacrifice of his own flesh and blood. He had saved the world on screen 100 times, but he was completely, tragically incapable of crossing an invisible line to hold his daughter's hand in reality. As Tom crossed into his 50s, he found himself standing at the absolute summit of Hollywood, yet he was completely, terrifyingly alone. The wives were gone. The daughter was gone. The only thing he had left was the camera. And so, to silence the deafening, unbearable roar of his own empty house, Tom Cruise was about to make a terrifying, subconscious decision. He was about to transform his cinematic career into a highly dangerous, adrenaline-fueled dance with his own mortality. He was going to use his own physical body as a battering ram, pushing himself closer and closer to the absolute limits of human endurance, desperately searching for a physical thrill loud enough to drown out the agonizing silence of his own heart. The alchemy of adrenaline, the glass tower, and the ultimate anesthetic. There's a widely accepted, highly conventional blueprint for the aging Hollywood leading man. When an actor crosses the threshold of his 50th birthday, society expects him to gracefully decelerate. He is supposed to trade the heavy action sequences for complex dramatic roles, sit behind a mahogany desk, and allow a younger, more durable generation of stuntmen to take the physical beatings. It is the natural, inevitable surrender to the limits of the human body. But Tom Cruise has never accepted the natural limits of anything. Following the catastrophic, highly publicized collapse of his marriage to Katie Holmes and the agonizing, permanent separation from his young daughter, Suri, a profound, chilling shift occurred within the architecture of Tom's career. The man who had meticulously controlled every single narrative of his existence suddenly found himself standing in the center of an emotionally empty empire. The golden cage he had built to keep himself safe had successfully locked everyone else out. He was incredibly wealthy. He was incredibly powerful. And he was completely, suffocatingly alone. When a human being is confronted with a silence that heavy, a silence filled with the ghosts of 3 failed marriages and the echoing absence of child, the brain desperately seeks a distraction. Some men turn to alcohol. Some men turn to superficial, fleeting romances. Tom Cruise turned to the most potent, dangerous, and intoxicating chemical naturally produced by the human body, adrenaline. In 2011, as his personal life was quietly buckling under the immense pressure of his belief system, a 49-year-old Tom Cruise traveled to Dubai to film Mission: Impossible Ghost Protocol. He did not use a stunt double. He did not rely on computer-generated green screens. He strapped himself into a specialized harness, stepped out a shattered window, and physically climbed the exterior glass of the Burj Khalifa, the tallest building on the face of the earth. Suspended over 2,000 feet in the air, dangling by a single wire, the wind whipping violently against his face, Tom Cruise smiled for the cameras. The global audience watched the footage and collectively gasped in absolute awe. They called it the ultimate dedication to cinema. They called him the hardest working man in show business. But if you look past the cinematic spectacle and examine the profound, underlying psychology of man dangling from the tallest tower in the world, a devastating, poetic truth begins to emerge. Why would a billionaire, a man who has absolutely nothing left to prove financially or artistically, voluntarily risk a fatal plummet to the concrete below? Because when you're hanging 2,000 feet in the air, your brain cannot process grief. When your entire physical organism is screaming in primal, desperate survival mode, you do not have the cognitive capacity to think about the divorce papers you just signed. You do not have the luxury of wondering what your daughter is doing thousands of miles away. For those few, terrifying minutes on the side of that glass tower, the agonizing, complicated mess of his personal life was completely, beautifully silenced. The sheer, overwhelming terror of the physical stunt acted as the ultimate, flawless anesthetic for his emotional agony. He had discovered a mechanism to outrun his own heartbreak. But an anesthetic is only temporary. When the stunt is over, the pain returns, which means the dose must be continually increased. Over the next decade, Tom transformed his blockbuster franchises into a relentless, escalating crusade against his own physical limits. In 2015, for Rogue Nation, a 53-year-old Tom strapped himself to the outside door of an Airbus A400M military cargo plane as it took off, accelerating to over 200 miles per hour at an altitude of 5,000 feet. The sheer force of the wind was so violent it could have easily blinded him or torn the flesh from his bones. In 2018, for Fallout, he learned how to fly a helicopter, engaging in a terrifying high-altitude aerial chase. He performed a high-altitude low-opening halo parachute jump, plunging from a military aircraft at 25,000 feet. He broke his ankle leaping across a massive gap between two rooftops in London, simply pulled himself up, finished the take on a shattered bone, and then walked off camera. He was punishing his body with the exact same ruthless, uncompromising discipline his father had once used to terrorize him in his youth. But this time, Tom was the one inflicting the pain. He was reclaiming absolute control over his own suffering. Reflecting on a fanatical, relentless dedication performing these incredible feats of endurance, Tom once offered a quote that the press interpreted as mere professional commitment, but which carries a profoundly tragic, almost sacrificial undertone. "I'm always pushing. I want to give the audience everything. I don't care about the risks. I just want to entertain them. I give them everything I have. I give them everything I have." Listen to the absolute, majestic sorrow buried inside that declaration. For the older audiences watching this, especially the men and women who have buried their own emotional pain in 80-hour work weeks, who stayed at the office late into the night because going home to an empty, fractured house was simply too painful to bear, Tom's philosophy is deeply, painfully understood. He was giving the audience everything he had, because the audience was the only relationship in his life that had never, ever abandoned him. The studio executives did not hand him divorce papers. The fans sitting in the darkened theaters did not ask him to compromise his religious beliefs. The cinema was the only sanctuary that demanded absolute perfection and actually rewarded him for it. He was willingly, eagerly sacrificing his own physical flesh on the grand altar of Hollywood, offering his body as a spectacular, multi-million-dollar tribute to the only God that had never let him down. He became a cinematic martyr. He was the undisputed savior of the action genre, a man who would gladly endure broken bones and freezing winds just to ensure that strangers in a movie theater would smile. But as the 2010s drew to a close, a heavy, unavoidable realization began to settle over the aging titan. The stunts were getting bigger. The box office numbers were climbing to astronomical heights. But the man inside the impeccably tailored suits was fundamentally entirely alone. He had successfully turned himself into an invincible machine, but he was about to face a global catastrophe that no amount of physical endurance could conquer. As the year 2020 approached, the entire world was preparing to shut down. The movie theaters, the very temples where Tom Cruise worshipped, were about to go completely dark. The last movie star was about to be stripped of his final refuge. And to save the only empire he had left, the 60-year-old legend was preparing to put on his aviator sunglasses one last time, orchestrating a monumental return to the skies that would permanently secure his immortality, while forcing him to confront the ultimate, lonely reality of his own magnificent, empty castle. The savior of cinema, the empty castle, and the last movie star. There is a terrifying, magnificent isolation that exists at the very edge of the atmosphere. When a pilot pushes a machine past the speed of sound, all the chaotic noise of the earth completely falls away, leaving nothing but absolute, deafening silence. For 4 decades, Tom Cruise lived his entire life breaking the sound barrier. He outran his poverty. He outran his dyslexia. And he outran the agonizing heartbreak of his fractured marriages. His only remaining sanctuary on the face of the earth was the cinematic theater. The dark, crowded auditoriums where strangers gathered to watch him conquer the impossible were the only places where he truly felt safe, validated, and unconditionally loved. But in the spring of 2020, an invisible, catastrophic global event occurred that no script could have ever predicted. The entire world was forced into quarantine. The bustling streets went quiet, and the movie theaters, the sacred temples where Tom Cruise worshipped, went completely, violently dark. For the Hollywood industry, it was a financial crisis. But for Tom Cruise, it was a terrifying, existential threat to his very survival. If the theaters died, his sanctuary died with them. As the streaming platforms aggressively attempted to buy out major blockbusters to broadcast on televisions and laptops, Tom drew an absolute, uncompromising line in the sand. He was holding the completed sequel to the movie that had made him a god 34 years prior, Top Gun: Maverick. The studio executives begged him to release it on streaming. They offered him hundreds of millions of dollars to simply surrender to the digital age. But Tom Cruise, standing as a fierce, unyielding guardian of the old-school cinematic experience, flatly refused. He held the film hostage for over 2 agonizing years. He waited until the world was finally ready to leave their homes and sit in the dark together again. When Top Gun: Maverick finally exploded into global theaters in the summer of 2022, it was not just a movie premiere, it was a cultural resurrection. The film grossed an astonishing, earth-shattering $1.49 billion worldwide. Older audiences, the men and women who had grown up watching the original in 1986, flocked to the theaters in record numbers, deeply moved by the nostalgic, breathtaking reality of an aging pilot who simply refused to become obsolete. A few months later, at an industry luncheon, the legendary director Steven Spielberg was caught on camera walking up to Tom Cruise, embracing him, and delivering a quote that permanently cemented Tom's historical immortality. "You save Hollywood's ass," Spielberg told her with profound, unvarnished reverence. "And you might have saved theatrical distribution. You saved Hollywood's ass." Listen to the absolute, staggering magnitude of that coronation. The boy who was told he was an idiot by his teachers in Syracuse, the boy who hid under his bed to escape his father's fists, had literally placed a multi-billion-dollar global industry on his aging shoulders and carried it across the finish line. He was the undisputed savior of cinema. He was the last true movie star. But a savior, by the very definition of the word, is someone who sacrifices himself for the salvation of others. As we look at Tom Cruise today, in the year 2026, at 63 years old, the breathtaking, heartbreaking cost of his absolute perfection is laid entirely bare. The physical reality of his 63 years is masked by incredible discipline, but the emotional reality is staggering. While his peers and contemporaries are settling into quiet, warm comforts of grandfatherhood, Tom operates like a shark that will die if it stops swimming. He does not have a permanent, grounded home filled with the chaotic, beautiful noise of a messy family. He lives out of luxurious hotel penthouses in London. He spends his birthdays on movie sets, blowing out candles surrounded by production crews rather than relatives. And then there's the most devastating, agonizing mathematical reality of his existence. In April 2024, his biological daughter, Suri, turned 18 years old, officially crossing the threshold into adulthood. Now, in 2026, she is a 20-year-old woman charting her own independent path in the world. She grew up beautifully, raised by the fierce, protective love of her mother, Katie Holmes. But she grew up entirely outside of her father's orbit. The invisible wall constructed by his rigid belief system remained completely, tragically impenetrable. Tom Cruise can fly helicopters. He can hold his breath underwater for 6 minutes, and he can jump a motorcycle off a cliff in Norway. But he could not figure out how to cross the invisible line to sit in the audience at his own daughter's high school graduation. The greatest illusionist in the history of cinema pulled off the ultimate magic trick. He gave the world everything, and he kept absolutely nothing for himself. When you strip away the billions of dollars, the private jets, and the spectacular stunts, the story of Tom Cruise is a profound, almost Shakespearean tragedy of a man who successfully conquered his childhood demons, but accidentally trapped himself inside the armor he built. He wanted absolute control. He wanted to ensure that nobody could ever hurt him, abandon him, or make him feel small ever again. And he succeeded. He built a towering, magnificent, golden castle that is absolutely impenetrable to pain, betrayal, or chaos. But as he stands at the very top of that magnificent castle, looking out over the cinematic empire he personally saved, the 63-year-old king must eventually realize the terrifying truth about his fortress. It is completely, absolutely empty. He gave us the ultimate hero. He gave us Maverick. He gave us Ethan Hunt. But in exchange for entertaining the world, he gave up the simple, incredibly beautiful luxury of being a mortal man. The boy from Syracuse conquered the globe. But the legend of Tom Cruise will forever remain a beautiful, haunting reminder that sometimes the price of touching the sun is a permanent, irreversible loss of the ground beneath your feet. As we close the book on the breathtaking, highly complex, and profoundly lonely journey of Tom Cruise, the camera turns away from the last movie star, and it focuses gently on you. Tom's story is a powerful reminder of the hidden costs of absolute ambition. Society constantly pushes us to climb higher, to achieve more, and to build impenetrable walls to protect ourselves from failure. But as the cinematic legend proves, the pursuit of total control often comes at the heavy price of profound isolation. What about you? Looking back at your own life, have you ever sacrificed a piece of your personal happiness or precious time with your family, chasing the illusion of success? When applause fades, what is the true sanctuary you return to? Please share your life lessons and hard-earned wisdom in the comments below. If this deep, unfiltered look into the heart of a Hollywood titan moved you, please leave a like, share this video, and subscribe to our channel. Thank you for your time today. Remember to cherish the messy, beautiful imperfections of family. And until next time, keep holding on to what truly matters.